I woke to a monitor I didn't remember attaching. The light above me hummed like something thinking. Down the hall, a clock ticked twice and then skipped an hour. Someone, maybe me, maybe not, whispered my name and laughed without breath. I sat up. My hands were wrapped in someone else's history. The ward door was locked from the inside. And outside, past the frosted glass, the word 13 kept shifting on the corridor wall, sometimes a 1, sometimes a 3, like the building couldn't decide which truth to wear that night. They told me to come alone. They said the doctor wanted to run one more scan, something routine after the crash. That was the story I told myself on the drive, the one you tell when the map still looks like a challenge and not a confession. When I signed in, the night receptionist typed with 2 fingers and never looked up. She slid a thin plastic bracelet across the desk without matching eyes, and it made the sound a dead thing makes when you close a book on it. "This is 3 a.m., she said. "Ward 13 is closed for visitors." "I'm not a visitor," I told her. "My name is Ethan. I'm here for—" She handed me a clipboard with a pen that had chewed plastic where someone had been nervous before me. I wrote my name the way you write something you don't expect to keep hurried, all caps. Her eyes flicked to my signature, and for a second, they were the only human eyes in the room. "We don't like names on these floors," she said softly. "They make the lights miss home." That should have been the moment to leave. Most people would have left. I didn't. The night was a kind of gravity. Something about that humming fluorescent promised completion if I kept walking. The elevator smelled like pennies and old coffee. It opened on a floor that had no number by the door, just a single pale sign that read, in sticky, fading letters, Ward 13. The corridor was longer than the building should allow, as if the walls had been sneaked in at an angle to stretch the night. The ward smelled like antiseptic and rain. The lights were half asleep, flickering as if they couldn't decide whether to continue. Beds lined both sides, each one pulled tight as if the sheets were holding a breath. Monitors blinked in slow, lazy syncopation. No TV sound, no late-night carts clattering, nothing but the soft, mechanical breathing of machines and the far, distant hiss of the air vent. It was the kind of quiet that makes your ears work overtime. You start hearing your own pulse like a second, more honest voice. "Ethan?" The voice came from the far end of the ward. Of course it did. My name sounded small there, like a coin dropped inside a piano. A man in a faded hospital gown sat in the third bed, too still to be sleeping, too awake to be a prop. He had eyes like pockets, deep and practical. He smiled like he'd been expecting me specifically. "You shouldn't be in here," he said. I told him about the receptionist, that they told me Ward 13 was closed. He shrugged as if those details were weather. "They say that. They always say that. The building likes a whisper better than a shout." I made a loop down the aisle. Doors to private rooms were closed. Each door was numbered, but the numbers were wrong. 31, 7, 92. When I leaned close to the frosted glass of one room, I saw hands pressed against the inside. My hands, older and younger at once, palms splayed as if to say don't forget. When I looked away, the sheet in that room rustled, though no one moved. The monitor read 0 o'clock and then, absurdly, 13:13 and then 3:13. I laughed, because what else do you do when clocks begin to argue with each other? The nurse at the station had a name tag that said Marlowe in thin blue letters. He was folding through a stack of charts as if the pages might sort themselves out. When he looked up, the hospital light hid the left side of his face and left the right shadowed, like someone was conducting a small, private execution of his features. "You're not on the list," he said without sounding surprised. "Nobody's supposed to be on this list. I was told the doctor wanted to run a scan," I said. "You were told a lot of things," Marlowe answered. "Are you in pain?" "Not yet." It was the most honest thing I could think to say. Marlowe glanced at my bracelet and laughed in the way people do when they about to show you something you weren't supposed to see. These bracelets are polite crimes. They promise a room and they give you a number. Did you know numbers sometimes get their feelings hurt? He tapped the bracelet like it was a delicate relic. You pick numbers and numbers pick you back. Don't argue. Numbers have better memories. He handed me a chart with my name printed on it in a font that looked slightly different from the rest, like a voice that had learned my name from someone else. There were notes I didn't remember writing. States episodes of Deja Vu, and beneath that, in a hurried, slanted hand, keeps repeating hallway, hears voices, sleep deprived. I had not written any of that. The handwriting looked like mine on bad days. Where's the doctor? I asked. Marlowe leaned back until his chair made a small storm against the tile. He left. All the doctors left. They leave and the ward stays awake to stitch the quiet. The ward became a place that watched me make choices. Every time I tried a door, the corridor pulsed like a throat. A child's laughter came from a room with a cracked window and no child. A radio in a supply closet played a song I couldn't place, words that suggested the same sentence over and over. Let go. Sometimes the words were different. Remember. Sometimes there were no words at all, just the memory of yelling without the sound. I found my phone sitting on a bedside table, battery dead and screen cracked in a pattern that looked eerily like a map. My texts were gone except one thread, messages from a number labeled ME that read, "Stop looking for the door. The door is looking for you." The timestamp was 3 days ago. I didn't own that number. As the night stretched, I met other people who looked like people I used to know and almost remember. A woman knitting invisible stitches told me about the stairs that open only to rooms you've left. A thin man with a throat full of coins claimed the elevator only goes sideways on nights like this. None of them had visiting hours. Most of them had address cards tucked inside their robes with the same handwriting, returned. Sometimes, if I stood still long enough, the ward replayed an event that almost made sense. A car sliding on black ice, a horn, a smudge of red against the windshield. A mirror in the bathroom showed me holding my head in my hands and staring at my own face until it changed into someone else, an older version of me, hollowed and serene. I watched the older me mouth a single word, stay. I hated the idea of staying. I wanted to go back to my car, call someone, make coffee, undo the night as if it were a sweater. Funny how decisions line up like dominoes in your chest. One wrong tilt and everything falls into the same shadowy pattern. The ward was patient zero for small betrayals. Hallways would fold into themselves. A door I'd just come through would be a brick wall the next time. Maps on the walls would redraw their streets. Once, I found myself watching my own back pass a curtain as if I were trailing myself. My reflection, my doppelganger, kept practicing leaving. That's when the recording started. It played from a cassette player in a storage closet, an anachronism. But in that place anachronisms felt like relatives, familiar, wrong. My voice came out of the tiny speaker, younger, shaky, singing a count to myself. 1, 2, breathe, 3. The recording said my name in a way I hadn't for years, not like a label, but like an accusation. Listen to the whole thing, the thin man with the coins told me, though he hadn't been there a moment before. His voice crinkled with things he'd been trying to swallow. The tape wound like a heart monitor. On it, I described strands of the night, details only I would know, a dent in the passenger door, my sister's red scarf in the back seat, the exact number of bruises I didn't have yet. The tape ended with a statement that made something in my chest stop and rearrange itself. I'll be back to remember this. Don't let me forget. Maybe you already forgot, Marlowe said when he found me staring at the player. He had appeared at the doorway as if he had keys to places that weren't meant to be keyed. Sometimes the ward borrows pieces of you to make up for the missing ones. It borrows memories and stitches them together with fluorescent thread. It was getting harder to tell the ward from my memory. The two were doing the same thing, rearranging me into a story with a satisfying ending, except the ending kept missing a page. At 3 in the morning, a nurse wheeled past me with a tray of pills and a name tag that said E. Holloway. The name on the tag was my name, spelled out the same way I'd once written it on a form for jury duty. The nurse pushed the card and the pills clinked like broken teeth. She paused and looked at me with a softness that made my mouth want to apologize for no reason. "You look like you need rest," she said, and the words smelled like mint and nettle. "This place makes you solve your own puzzles. Some people like puzzles. You might like the way the pieces feel." I wanted to ask whether she was talking about the ward or the life I'd left bleeding on the road. But when I opened my mouth, the hallway moved, and when it settled, the nurse and the cart were gone. In their place was the opposite, a small table with a photograph in an old frame. I recognized the photo, me on a summer day, a stupid grin, eyes shaded by a baseball cap. On the back, written in a hand I almost recognized, these words, "Do not bring this into the dark. It invites the dark to sit down." I drove myself into that dark, and now the dark was sitting like an old friend in the corner of the ward, knitting something that might be a future I hadn't earned. That was the mind game. It wasn't about scaring me with ghosts. It was about making every choice feel like a loop, making the idea of exit more hallucinatory than the corridors themselves. The ward did not want to be left unresolved. It wanted confessions, small things to attach itself to, my brother's laugh, the exact measurements of my apartment, the smell of burnt coffee at 6:43 a.m. It wanted ownership. I tried to leave twice. I walked to the stairwell and descended, counting the steps with a rational precision that felt childish. I expected the emergency exit to squash me into the parking lot or into a cold, honest December morning. Instead, the stairwell opened into a garden that smelled like the holidays, and nowhere at once, boxwood trimmed like applause, a fountain with black water that didn't ripple. A woman in scrubs sat on a bench and fed invisible pigeons. "You can go," she said, not looking at me. "You can leave." But the night likes a story that admits its ending. "What is this place?" I asked, because asking questions uses air, and I wanted anything to be more solid than the ward's rearrangements. "Some call it a ward," she said. "Some call it a waiting room. Some call it the place between the doors. It's what happens when time forgets to be linear." I laughed then, a small, short thing that felt like an apology. "So, let me get this straight. This is a hospital and also not a hospital. It's a loop and also a line. It's a place that decides you need the night to finish telling your story." She paused, and the name on her badge was partly torn, but I could read Dr. Whitley. Then she shook her head. "Names are cosmetic here. People use them and they fall off. If there was a logic, it was a logic dressed as a riddle. The more I resisted, the longer the ward kept me. The more I accepted some small memory and let it settle like a coin into a fountain, the more the corridor blunted its retelling into something manageable. Acceptance here wasn't about giving up. It was about admitting which version of the night belonged to me and which belonged to the ward. I found myself in a room with a window that looked out on an empty highway. A hospital bed swallowed the center. In that bed, a man who could have been me, or could have been a version of a me that had made different decisions, lay like a folded map. His chest rose and fell like a slow, faultless tide. Tubes attached, and a faint line of words stitched the monitor into motion. On the bedside table, a small slip of paper read, "Do not wake him until he says his name." I sat and watched. He was sleeping the kind of sleep I had once imagined, deep, restorative, unbothered by the small betrayals of life. I wanted to shake him awake and see if his eyes were mine. I wanted to see if the name that came from his tongue would be my surrender or my salvation. I must have dozed because the room folded, and when it opened again, the man was gone. In his place, on the blanket, there was a small packet folded like an apology. Inside the packet was a Polaroid, me at a gas station, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, a bruise on my temple that hadn't been there in any of my earlier reflections. On the back, someone had written, in the same slanted, hurried hand from the chart, "We keep what we can. We let the rest go. W?" Well, I didn't know who W was, but the ward did. At dawn, if you can call the blue that leaks into the ward at 5 in the morning, dawn, things change. Not because the ward admits defeat, but because light has a way of clarifying which illusions are willing to stay. For a few minutes, the hallways recited truth like a prayer. Names that had been woven into the curtains became readable. A sequence of doors that had refused to open now showed simple labels: kitchen, therapy, storage. The monitors slowed to a comfortable rhythm. People who had been smiling with too many faces sat up like they remembered how to do an ordinary day. I reached the reception desk where, hours before, the woman had slid the bracelet across without looking. She looked at me this time, and something in her expression softened like a map that finally folds correctly. "You look like someone who needs to remember what they forgot," she said. "What do I do now?" My voice sounded like it had been fishing for a shore. "Leave when you can say the one thing the ward has been asking for," she said. "You'll know it when you say it." I walked the ward slowly, listening to the small sounds. The air was warmer now, less like a held breath, and more like a room that was waking up. I learned that the ward didn't want to steal my life. It wanted the permission to return the pieces it had kept, but it wanted a trade, a name, a truth, a small concession. I sat on the edge of an empty bed and, for the first time that night, allowed the memory to be whole. The crash wasn't cinematic. It was mundane and precise. The thin, high scream of rubber, the stupid arrogance of thinking you can outrun a patch of black ice, the way the steering wheel center cut across the chin like a punctuation. I had been on my way home from a job that wasn't mine anymore, because sometimes people keep routines even when they've stopped making sense. I had been tired. My sister had called earlier and I didn't answer. The last true thing I could put my hand on was the smell of cheap coffee. The ward wanted me to name the thing I had been running from. It wasn't the accident. It was the life I had left unspoken, apologies to people I hadn't called back, the way I had shrugged at someone who would have needed a solid shoulder, the way I had chosen the safe smallness over risking being undone. I said the name into the dark like a confession and a key at once. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't come when you needed me. I'm sorry I let the gas tank go too low and the coffee be cold. I'm sorry for every small omission I treated like a victory." The ward listened and, for a moment, the hum changed pitch. "Say who?" Marlowe said quietly. "Ethan Holloway," I said. The name came like a coin dropped into water. Rings spread and then softened. "I'm Ethan." Saying my name felt like turning a page. The monitors around me took a breath and synchronized. Somewhere, a clock unskipped an hour. When I left the ward, the hallway was ordinary and flawed in the way ordinary things are. Paint chipped in one place, a scuff where a gurney had scraped years ago. The sign that had been a shifting 13 held steady now, a 13 that didn't try to be anything else. I stepped into the elevator, and the doors closed like the end of a sentence. Outside, the parking lot was a disheveled proof. A snowflake clung to the edge of a car mirror, trembling like something that had nearly given up. My car was exactly where I'd left it, dent and all. The bruise on my temple was a bruise I could explain to an emergency room clerk, a small, stupid collision with the steering wheel. My phone buzzed to life in my pocket. I had missed calls, important ones, and also a spam call and a reminder for a dentist appointment. The world was the same world it had always been, except for a small private fact. The ward had shifted something in me. I drove home in a car that smelled like nothing and everything, a quiet, rebuilt place. I called a number and listened to someone answer with relief I could feel through wood and air. I made coffee, and it tasted like the world again, not like a story someone else had told. That night, months later, or minutes, because time is a patient liar, I dreamt of the ward. In the dream, I walked the corridor and past doors that showed scenes of lives being lived. A child blowing on soup, a woman tying her shoes, a man writing a postcard. When I opened one door, the room was empty except for an envelope on the pillow. Inside the envelope was a Polaroid of a younger me at a gas station. On the back was a note, "Keep this out of the dark." I folded that Polaroid into my wallet. I started calling people back. I learned to answer the small knocks before they turned into sledgehammers. Sometimes in the still hours, I think I hear a hum like a light thinking, "I don't like to imagine the ward sitting and knitting, but if it is, maybe it is knitting things back into place for people who need it." There are nights when the 13 tilts in my mind and I find myself listening for a clock to restart. The memory comes up like a tide and then recedes. When it does, I remember the only thing the ward asked for that I could give without costing my life. The truth that fits in the palm of your hand. The name you avoid saying because it brings the consequence of carrying into the room. If you ever find yourself in a hallway that stretches wrong at 2 in the morning, and if a nurse with half a smile asks whether you remember where you put your last apology, don't laugh. The night isn't always trying to trick you. Sometimes it's trying to make you honest long enough to let you go. I still wake sometimes to the hum, but now I listen differently. Now when a clock skips, I check my phone. Now when a door is a wall, I look for a window. Mostly I breathe. Mostly I answer the calls I used to let ring until they disappeared. And if on a very late night you hear someone whisper your name and laugh without breath, maybe say hello back. It might just be the ward returning a small borrowed piece of you. Or it might be something else. Either way, it will be listening to see whether you intend to take your life with you when you leave.